This video is going to change the way you think about color grading and look development forever, and for the better. We're going to talk about some misconceptions about color grading, and we're going to cover a lot of ground, but I promise you're going to walk away from this video with a solid understanding of what color grading can do, what it can't do, and how look development fits into the equation. Also, I'm going to show you a very powerful yet free tool which is going to drastically improve your color grading and look development workflow, which is a DCTL called Tetra, which is amazing, but more on that later in the video. Oops. A little bit of theory first, but we're going to get to the practical and hands-on stuff as soon as possible. Okay, first we need to define what a look is. On a technical level, I define it as the post-processing color pipeline, which is going to bring our images from what the camera saw to what our display can reproduce. These transformations can be simple, like in the case of a Rec. 79 conversion LUT, or more complex, where the tonal response and the gamut, the colors, go through a more nuanced transformation. Now, the mistake here would be to think of color grading and look development as being interchangeable, and that you can create a look using color grading tools, but this is simply not the case. And I'm gonna show you. We're gonna compare what a film print LUT does applied to a 3D cube versus a color corrector. Here we are in Fusion. We have two 3D cubes. The one on the right has a color corrector applied to it, and the one on the left has a film print LUT applied. No film print LUT, film print LUT. Film print LUTs are LUTs that have been created by companies like Kodak and Fuji in the early days of digital intermediate. At the time, post-production houses started scanning film negative to manipulate it digitally. But as they were doing that, they needed to see a preview of exactly how the images would have looked like once printed back on film for projection. So they measured the densities of thousands of patches of printed film and turned that into a mathematical model, which is our film print LUT. This is how a film print LUT applied to a 3D cube shapes the tonal and color response. Now, if we go to the other cube and try to mess around with the color corrector, let's see what we can do to our cube. We can tinker with the contrast. As you can see, it's a linear behavior. Same holds true for the gain, still a linear behavior. Lift does a different thing, but still behaves linearly. The gamma is interesting, it looks dangerous, but it's still a linear behavior, and the same with the brightness. And as we're rotating the hues, we're still within a linear type of behavior. And the same holds true for the saturation. And there's no way we can bend the cube in a nuanced and non-linear way like the film print LUT does. So, there is no way we can get to a meaningful representation. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to clarify that I'm not always talking about film just because I prefer how things were in the past. That's not the point. That's not the point at all. The point is that film has been engineered and perfected over decades, taking into account what our visual system likes and what it doesn't like. So, whenever we say let's emulate film, we shouldn't do it because it's a hipster format or because it sounds cool to say it, but because we shouldn't throw away all the work that has been done at Kodak and Fuji for over 100 years. And now, with that out of the way, let's get back to the video. So, there is no way we can get to a meaningful representation of a complex manipulation like a film print LUT using color grading tools, simply because they were not created with this intent. But what this tells us is that in order to create complex and nuanced looking images, like the ones that we see and love in movies, then we should use complex and nuanced transformations in order to prepare our footage for viewing. While we should think of color grading, which I'm not denigrating at all by the way, because it's an essential step, but it's a step where we use simple tools to conform what we shot to best fit the complex transformations that define our photographic look. Okay, a lot of theory. Let's now jump into DaVinci Resolve to put it into practice. Let's go. Okay, so here we are in the color page in DaVinci Resolve, and I already have my look in place here. And as we go along, I'm going to describe what each of those nodes does so that you can apply these concepts to your own look development. And for every clip, I also have a Rec. 79 version of the image, just as a reference to see where our look is going. Okay, so the four main components when I think about building a look are the contrast, so how the tones from black to white are rendered within the image, the color rendition, so how the skin tones are going to look like, how the greens are going to look like, etc. Then the saturation and how saturation interacts with luminance, that's very important. And also I like to add some crossover or split tone, which is derived from a characteristic of film where the densities of the red, green and blue layers are not lined up across the luminance range. And you get the effect of having cyan blue tones pushed in the shadows and orange yellow tones pushed in the highlights. And this further increases the color separation and contrast within the image. Okay, so let's start from color management. I like to manually color manage my project, so I'm using DaVinci YRGB. And now let's disable all the nodes and start from the output node. On the last node I have a film print emulation LUT, because I already showed you before that is a very nuanced transformation, so why not use it? And as I enable it, you can see that something is off. I mean, if we compare the Rec. 79 version of the image with the one with the film print LUT applied, you can see that something is off. And this is because this LUT is actually expecting film negative primaries, and we are feeding it a log image, in this case a ARRI log C image, so it's not behaving properly. And there are two ways we can fix this. The free way implies the usage of a color space transform to go from whatever log you have, in this case ARRI White Gamut 3 ARRI log C, to Rec. 79 Cineon film log with luminance mapping and saturation compression enabled. And what this does is going to bring our image, our log image, closer to film primaries. In fact, now if we switch between the Rec. 79 version of the image and the one with the color space transform before hitting the film print LUT, you can see that now we have a somewhat normalized image where the film print LUT is behaving correctly. But there's a better way to do it that utilizes a LUT that actually transforms the log footage to match the color densities and contrast of actual scanned film negative. And in this case, I profiled the Kodak 50D, and as you can see, there is quite a difference between the color space transform and the Kodak 50D. But apart from the visual differences, I want to show you the differences on a technical level by applying the same color space transform that I have on the other image to a color gradient, and you can see that this is not the smoothest transformation ever, okay? But as we apply my Kodak 50D LUT to the same color gradient, you can see that the image doesn't break at all, okay? And if you're interested in my Kodak 50D LUT, you can check it out at film-match.com, where I sell it with a full film emulation power grade that works wonderfully. And also I have a video on my channel where I explain all the functionalities of the power grade, and you can check it out. The link is in the description, or I'm gonna put it up here somewhere. Okay. So for the rest of the video, I'm gonna use my Kodak 50D LUT, but if you wanna follow along without purchasing the Kodak 50D, you can easily use this transformation here, okay? Like the same concepts apply. What we are actually doing by using a film print LUT as our output node is, first of all, we are color managing our image. This film print LUT outputs Rec. 709, so we are color managed here. But we're not only color managing our images, we're also defining already all the main components of the look at once. Basically, we're defining the tone mapping of our image, so the contrast, the color rendition, and also the saturation. And as you can see, there's already quite a difference between the Rec. 79 version of the image and the image that goes through the film print LUT with the adequate preparation for the log image. But now we can use this as a starting point to actually build our custom look. And the first thing that I want to address with my look development is skin tones. And I want to achieve the color rendition of the skin that you see in movies like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or La La Land, where you have orangey and very saturated skin tones, but that still look very natural. Here is where the powerful DCTL called Tetra that I talked to you about before comes into play. This is the user interface of the DCTL. In terms of user interface, is very similar to the RGB mixer that you already have in the color page here, where you have how much red, green, and blue you have in each channel, but with the addition of cyan, magenta, and yellow. Also, the math underneath this tool is a little bit more complex than the RGB mixer, because the math underneath this is just a 3x3 matrix, while here is using tetrahedral interpolation, which allows for more nuanced color remapping. So the channels that are going to affect the skin tones the most are the red channel and the yellow channel, and the balancing between the two is going to define how the skin tones are rendered in your look. I normally like to use a parallel mixer here to have only one channel affected for each node here. So here I affected only the red channel, and here I affected only the yellow channel, so that I can turn them on and off and see how the manipulation behaved by itself. And this is what I did with the red channel, and you can feel free to copy paste these settings. Nothing else has been changed here, just the red channel, and this is what I did before and after. So, and as you can see on the color chart, the only colors that have been affected are the red colors, and to a lesser degree also the colors that are closer to red. So as you can see, maybe a little bit of this yellow and this orange have been affected by this manipulation. But while I was building this look, at this point I was very satisfied with my skin tones, and I didn't feel the need of modifying anything within the yellow channel. But then I tweaked the saturation node, and I actually went back to the tetra within the yellow channel to tweak and fine-tune the skin tones further. So okay, so let's jump to the saturation node, and if I turn it on, this is what I did with it. But instead of increasing the saturation with the normal saturation slider, actually did something different. I transformed the color space within this node, and this node only, from RGB to HSL by clicking on color space and then selecting HSL, and then I deselected the channel number 1 and channel number 3 that stand for hue and luminance by leaving only the saturation component active. And in this way I can use the saturation sliders to actually affect saturation instead of affecting the brightness as it would normally do in the RGB color space. The reason why I switched from RGB to HSL is because saturating the image within the HSL color space allows for a more organic saturation, where the colors, as they get saturated, they also drop in luminance a little bit. And the same thing happens in the HSV color space, but it's a little bit too aggressive in my opinion in terms of how much the colors get dropped in luminance. So I prefer the HSL color space is a little bit more subtle. What I did was increasing the saturation with the gamma slider, so mainly affecting the midtones, so where our skin tones live. And then I desaturated the highlights with the gain slider, and desaturating the highlights while pushing the saturation in the midtones allows for a highly saturated image that doesn't look overly saturated. And then I decreased the key output to 0.8 because I thought that it was a little bit too strong like this, but I liked the relationship between the saturation in the midtones and the desaturation in the highlights, so I didn't want to mess with that, so I just lowered the key output of the node. So then I realized that the skin tones were a little bit too much on the orangey side, and that's when I went back to the Tetra DCTL and I affected only the yellow channel here, and as we turn it on you can see that the skin tones get shifted a little bit more towards magenta before and after. And if we enable and disable what we did until now, this is what we got. Okay, so it's highly saturated, but you need to keep in mind that the eyes adjust to the level of saturation as they watch something. So at a certain point, this level of saturation is going to become the norm for your eyes and is going to be perceived as normal. Okay, very nice. So the last thing that I want to add to my look is some split tone effect. And already the film print emulation is already adding some split tone effect, where it adds some cyan in the shadows and some warm tones in the highlights. But I wanted to add a little bit more of that effect to make it more apparent. So I used a DCTL. This one is not for free, unfortunately, but is from a great colorist and DCTL developer, and his name is Carl Hendrickson, if I pronounce it correctly. I think he's a guy from Sweden, super nice guy, and he creates very interesting tools that allow you to do things that normally you wouldn't be able to do with the normal tools that you can find inside of DaVinci Resolve, or like in this case, it would get very cumbersome to do it with a with a tool inside DaVinci Resolve. Okay, let's enable it, and this is what it's actually doing. Okay, you can see it very much on the grayscale here. Okay, very nice. And how it works is that, okay, let's show the patches, the ramp, and the curves. Basically, in the hue section, you select a target hue, okay, that you want to inject in the image for the highlights and for the shadows, okay. And then with the shift section of the plugin, you actually decide how much you want to push that hue in the highlights and in the shadows, and you can see the movement in the curves. Also, there are 3 modes to achieve the split toning effect. There is a mixed mode, an additive mode, and a subtractive mode, and I always like to use the subtractive mode as it looks the most natural to me. You can also make the whites and blacks neutral, but I already have the amount that I like, so I'm gonna keep it like this. I like when the whites are not white. Just so you know, you can get pretty similar results, if not identical, by utilizing the curves, but it's a little bit more cumbersome to get the same results by using curves, and that's why I invested in a DCTL that allows me to get where I want faster and in a very clean way. This was our last node for our look development, and what I would do at this point is test our look on different images. This was the Rec 709 version of our image, and this is with the look applied. I think it looks wonderful, and I already applied the same look to these other images, always from ARRI. So Rec 709 with the look applied, and I think it travels pretty well. It travels with the same overall feeling that we were looking for, as you can see with this one as well. Rec 709 with the look applied, very, very nice. And also want to show you how the look behaves on clips that are shot on different cameras. So here we have a Sony A7S III clip, and I have a color space transform to go from Sony S-Gamut3.Cine S-Log3 to ARRI White Gamut ARRI Log C, as we develop the look for ARRI Log C. And as you can see, the look is behaving very, very well. Nothing is breaking, and if we turn off what we did to customize our look, this is what the film print LUT was doing by itself. This is with our custom modifications. Rec 709 look. This is our red clip, and here we went from red log 3G10 to ARRI White Gamut ARRI Log C, and as you can see, it travels pretty well here too. And now I want to show you, here I have an empty node, but I'm gonna grade underneath our look after the log to negative conversion, because I don't want to modify anything before this conversion for this conversion to work properly. So I just create a bunch of nodes before our look in order to use, like, I'm probably going to use only one node, but I'm not going to grade now. But for example, maybe one particular image is too much on the contrasty side, then you can just use simple tools to conform the image to hit our look the way I want it. So maybe I want it a little bit cooler. Okay, and basically we use very simple tools, but this is the difference between a Rec 709 version of the image and what we did. So the grading underneath our look can be limited to simple operations, but if you want to finesse the image by focusing on the slightest details shot to shot, you can do so by pulling keys, by using power windows, but without having to reinvent the wheel every single time. So want this image a little bit cooler, we can do so super easily. If we just had this, but we had to go here and then here, it would take so much time without having a look already built that it's gonna support our color grading. And also color grading is gonna become way more intuitive and enjoyable once you have a bottom-up color pipeline. We covered a lot of ground in this video, and I hope I made you understand the importance of having a bottom-up color pipeline, because all the pros have it, and if they don't have it themselves, they can rely on big post-production facilities like Photocam or Company 3, just to name two, and they do have a bottom-up color pipeline and a shit ton of color science knowledge. So as independent filmmakers, we should think more about that side of our craft. because it can affect our images, and it does affect our images more than what a lens can do or what a camera brand can do. So if you like this video, please let me know by leaving a thumbs up, by commenting, subscribing, share it with friends, and until next time, bye.